Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the most common task types in IELTS Writing Task 1, the line graph essay. There are 5 basic steps you need to follow every time you write a line graph essay. The first one is analyze the question. The second, identify the main features. Third, write an introduction, write an overview, and write the detailed paragraphs. We're going to walk through all 5 steps using a real example question, so everything will become very clear. So let's get started. Here is our example question. The graph below shows radio and television audiences throughout the day in 1992. And here you can notice that everything is measured over a 24-hour period. The task instruction says summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. And you need to write at least 150 words because it's task 1. So let's get started with our first step, which is writing an introduction part. And the rule here is simple. Paraphrase the question. Do not copy it word for word. Here's the original question. The graph below shows radio and television audiences throughout the day in 1992. And here is how we paraphrase it for our introduction. The line graph illustrates the proportion of people in the UK who watch TV and listen to the radio over 24 hours from October to December 1992. And here you can see the difference. We've changed the vocabulary and structure but keep the same meaning. That's all you need to do for our introduction part. Next up is the overview. And this is one of the most important paragraphs in your entire essay. In fact, without a clear overview, you're unlikely to score above band 5. The overview is where you describe the big picture trends. No specific numbers, no details, just a general story of the graph. Looking at our graph, we can identify 2 main features. The first main feature is the peak time for TV audiences is in the evening, 8 p.m., and here you can see it. And for the main feature 2, the peak time for radio audiences is in the morning, 8 a.m. And here you can notice it as well. As you can notice, there are no numbers, no specific times mentioned, just the overall trends. You should save the details for the next section, which is features. In the paragraphs 3 and 4, you will need to divide your essay by special features. As line graph essay is always dynamic, which means always shows changes and trends, you can divide it by trends as well. For example, for the first paragraph, you can write about increasing trends, and for the second, decreasing trends, or for example, for the first paragraph, comparison of similarities, while for the second one, comparison of differences. For example, in this specific line graph, we can use trends that we have already mentioned in the overview, like for the first paragraph, the peak time for TV audiences is in the evening, 8 p.m., and the peak time for radio audiences for the second paragraph. And here is the example of the paragraphs. For the feature 1, which is about TV audiences, less than 10% of people watch TV between 1 a.m. and 12 noon, but at 4 p.m. this figure increased rapidly, reaching a peak of almost half the population at 8 a.m. After this, the graph records a sharp decline in viewers, reaching a low of only a tiny percentage by 3 a.m. For the feature 2, which is about radio audiences, radio, on the other hand, shows a very different trend. The most popular time for listeners to be tuned in was just after 8 a.m. when around 27% of the population was listening. After a brief peak, the numbers dropped steadily to barely 2%, apart from fluctuations at around 4 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. The percentage of listeners remained low overnight before beginning a rapid ascent from 6 a.m. to the 8 a.m. high. Notice how we're comparing the 2 lines and using language like on the other hand and a very different trend. That's exactly what the examiner wants to see. Now let's talk about vocabulary, because line graphs are dynamic, meaning they show change over time, and to describe change well, you need the right words. For upward trends, you can use verbs like this. For downward trends, like this. For no change and for fluctuation, you can see some words here as well. You also need adjectives and adverbs to describe how much and how fast something changes. For example, a dramatic increase, dramatically, a significant rise, significantly, and so on. Using this kind of language variety will seriously boost your lexical resource score. Try to use at least 5 or 6 different change words in your essay. Let's talk about tenses, because this is where a lot of students lose marks. The tense you use depends on the time frame shown in the graph. If the graph shows past data, like our 1992 example, use the past simple for events in sequence. Use the past perfect when referring to what had happened by a certain point. The figure had reached 5 by 1980. If the graph shows recurring or general trends, use the present simple. There is a significant rise at 6 a.m. every morning. And if the graph includes projected or predicted future data, use future worms. The figure will reach 15,000 in 2020, or it's expected to increase, and so on. Always check the graph's time frame before you start writing, because it tells you which tense to use. And that's everything you need to know to write a great IELTS writing task one-line graph essay. To recap the 5 steps one more time. First of all, you need to analyze the question, identify the main features, write an introduction, which means paraphrasing the question, write an overview, which is about general trends, no numbers, and write the detailed paragraphs, specific data, and comparisons. Good luck with your exam, and I will see you in the next video.